Well, Brian, I guess this week, unfortunately, we are saying bye, Felicia. This is the Superhero Pantheon. Now on this podcast, we will take 3 episodes of the Fox Kids version of Spider-Man that aired in the mid-90s and discuss/review. This is not for Pantheon eligibility, but it's a fun side project. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so by following us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, this week we are discussing Spider-Man Season 4, Episodes 7 through 9. All I'm going to say is, my favorite episode of this entire series may be located in one of these 3 episodes, so that's a little bit of a tease for you. We're going to start off by talking about, of course, the return of Blade, the return of Green Goblin, and the return of Mary Jane ? But, Brian, I do have to apologize to Brian. I stole your Bye Felicia joke, so apologies, but that's all I had.
Well, I mean, I did think of it, but I was just kind of like, I just had the realization that, yeah, she's not coming back on this show. I think at least because I think season 5 is all just like crossover tie-ins or whatever and loose ends. So this is it. And man, what a run, because these 8 episodes, or whatever, 6 episodes that she's been as Black Cat have been like a breath of fresh air for me. Like, not all the episodes have been great plot-wise, but I think character-wise, total 180 on the Felicia character. I couldn't say it enough last week. But man, like, I feel like her kind of taking like hold. Like, to me, like, Spider-Man was such a side character in this Vampire Queen episode that, like, it was Felicia that kind of took the lead and was mainly centralized about her, even though Spider-Man was like feeling guilty because it was his blood too that helped turn Morbius into what he was or whatever. But it was really like Felicia, because she's the one that's in love with him. She's the one that kind of counts the most in terms of his relationship. So, like, that relationship, coming back to that and them coming back together, I was like, wow, that's the sign of a really strong relationship, because despite all that shit, despite all the complications, despite the possible love side triangle with like Peter Parker and Spider-Man, she's stuck with Morbius, man. So, that's good. Like, that's a really like adult thing, you know what I mean? Like, she could have easily just gave up on him, and almost did multiple times, but by the end of this episode, she sticks with Morbius, and Morbius learns to, I guess, kind of control his urges based on that whatever Blade's been taking for years, that serum that Whistler's been giving him to kind of control those urges on the vampire side. I guess they figured out some highly, I don't know, highly like, tested kind of thing for Morbius, because like it's really like affecting him to the point where he's making rational decisions now. So that was kind of like, wow, like they really did a 180 on that character as well. So a lot of babyface turns at the end. Or not a lot, but just the one main babyface turn at the end. Because when you see Black Cat, Spider-Man, and Morbius on a ledge together, all on the same team, it's quite the visual, considering what they've been going through and how many fights Morbius and Spider-Man has had in the last year and the last 2 seasons. So really quite refreshing, and kind of a sad ending, I guess.
I mean, I think it's a sad ending because we are no longer going to have Black Cat as a part of this show. I think that's what really kind of stinks about it, is I think her presence was incredibly welcomed, and it kind of sucks that we are not going to have her be a part of the show in the immediate future. I think that's the part that's so rough to me, is that I think she has been such a breath of fresh air for this show, and I think season 4 has been a really strong season, a lot because of her presence. So I think that's where we come down. But let's get into this episode a little bit. So we do have Felicia having some conflict, and again, you mentioned the fact that this episode was very much centered around her. She talks about knowing that she has to hurt either Morbius or Spider-Man. Meanwhile, I like the contrast of having her kind of flying around and Spider-Man also flying around, wondering whether he's going to see Black Cat again. Meanwhile, in Europe, Brian, Vampire Queen is trying to bite people. And I have a question. What year is it in this European city? Because it does not look like 1994 at all.
I think we talked about this before when they went to Europe in another season, I think. And we were just like, why are they still in the 40s and 50s? It's like, I don't know, man. I think it has something to do with like the Universal horror movies from back in the day. Because if you look at like the Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, there's still that European villager kind of look. And I think because even they mentioned like the B movies, like they even mentioned B movie horror movies in these episodes, they go to that look specifically just to bring you that like nostalgic kind of feel. But again, it's kind of insulting to the modern Europeans. So it's like, I don't know, but they're doing it for like effect. You know what I mean? Because, you know, older European villages look a lot creepier than the modern, you know, cities. Right. So, you know, like just picture the Wolfman going through the woods in the original Wolfman movie and then go into the village and the town and all that kind of thing. It's kind of that visual they want. So I kind of get it, even though it's like way off the timeline.
So we get the return of Blade as he gives chase. Vampire Queen escapes. Blade is not happy because he realizes that she is his mother. Dun, dun, dun. Meanwhile, back in New York, we get Black Cat continuing to avoid Spider-Man, thinking about Michael Morbius. Morbius is weak, but does not want to feed on anyone else. Brian, how did Vampire Queen get to New York so fast? I could not believe it. Like, was this earlier on in the timeline? Like, how? Just how?
Well, I mean, if in one way to look at it is like in the last episode, I think it was, where like they were Felicia was talking to Whistler and he was all like Blades in Europe. So in theory, maybe that happened then, and then like a day later, I don't know. She flew? Let's just say she flew, because she was flying all over the place. But damn, that's a long flight, even for a single person with no jet engine around them. So I don't know. Like the traditional way would, of course, be you put the body in the coffin, you put the coffin on a creepy boat that's going to sail from Europe to Atlantic, and then it's going to look really creepy when it gets to the dock, and then, you know, a blood massacre occurs once the vampire wakes up or whatever. That's traditionally the kind of shit that happens in these horror movies when vampires come to America. So I'm gonna assume she flew, and let's just leave it at that. And I mean, I don't even know what she did for meals during the flight, so I don't know.
Just incredibly bizarre how she was able to get there and somehow avoid daylight. I walked away incredibly confused. So we got Flash and Deborah knocked unconscious, which is appropriate because they don't really contribute much to the storyline in my view. Everybody thinks that Morbius is the one who attacked, but he in fact was not, because it was Vampire Queen. Black Cat said she wants Spider-Man to stay out of this and to go solo. Boy, Brian, Spider-Man's saltiness just doesn't feel appropriate here. Like, Black Cat is giving Spider-Man a taste of his own medicine, and you kind of love to see it.
Yeah, it was kind of satisfying, despite, like, I was kind of weighing it, you know, like weighing the scales, like who's more guilty in this situation, like, does it really matter? Who's more appropriate in the role of saving Morbius? Is it Spider-Man or Black Cat? When it really boils down to it, you probably have to go with Black Cat, despite, you know, this guilt that Spider-Man does have, like it's a legit guilt for help creating Morbius. But, you know, Felicia's the love of his life, so that's going to be a more important relationship, and obviously Morbius is going to respond more to Felicia than to Spider-Man. So in reality, it does make sense that she should be the one to go after Morbius and not Spider-Man, because every time Spider-Man goes after Morbius, it ends in a fight. But every time Felicia goes after Morbius, it ends with some kind of like, you know, discussion that leads closer to him to being a human, or getting his humanity back. So I noticed those little things. Again, it's probably because of the female writers, you know, making things and tweaking things to make things much more sensible. But I thought, like, this slow build for Morbius turning back to his humanity, all because of the love of Felicia. I thought that was just a great thing, and then they kind of built to this great moment at the end. That was like still, it's kind of sad, like I said, but we'll get to the weird. Well, not as weird, but this big cliffhanger of an ending coming up.
Well, it's just weird because Blade very much does not want to fight his mother, which is a clear contrast from the previous episode. And the one thing I will say, Blade's the voiceover performance is much better. I don't think the character is still all that great, but Blade just feels less annoying, and just for that reason alone, that makes this episode pretty strong, I would say. And there's just a lot of tension about what Vampire Queen is trying to do versus people trying to blame Morbius for what happened. You get Terry Lee piecing out at some point, which is pretty funny. And we get Vampire Queen turning her back on her son. It's really weird to me. And I say this because we have the perspective of knowing that a few years later, one of the best superhero scenes of all time is Blade at the rave. But here, Brian, we get the Recombinator being used at a disco ball.
Yeah, that was a really ridiculous kind of thing, but at the same time, it kind of was like a PG way of making vampires without having to bite people's necks. So that was a way to get around it. Very cool concept because it was kind of like creepy, kind of reminded me of. Did you ever watch the real Ghostbusters back in the day?
I did. I have not watched it in a while, but I'm aware of the show.
Yeah, there was this one episode where I think it was like vampires fighting werewolves, and they kind of like attacked each other, and the vampires started to become the werewolves, and the werewolves started to become the vampires. It kind of reminded me of that because it was like a wow, that you really don't see that in a kid's show kind of thing. And then same thing here, where like they were literally turning people into vampires, but in the most PG way, scientific way possible, and they turned them back in a kind of safe way. So it was fine, and I get the whole idea of she wanted to create this whole army of vampires, and that's what vampire general doesn't want to do that. So I get it. So just really interesting stuff because I think the really great part of this episode is like the drama, like the real drama between Blade and his mom, Felicia and Morbius, and then Spider-Man in the middle of it all trying to play it straight, and then you got Terry Lee who's in love with Blade, but is conflicted because she knows Blade is a vampire killer and wants to go after Morbius, but she finds out later that Morbius was innocent, so she's conflicted about that too. So there's a lot of real drama going on. So I think that's what makes this episode so memorable for me and Jerome, is because it's starting to feel like a real drama in a movie, like almost like a real movie, to the point where by the end of it, like I said, it's that ending where it just feels so almost like a Casablanca type ending almost, except Morbius and Felicia do all go off together, but at the same time, Blade is like hunting his own mom. And to go after your own mom like that, that's kind of like such a tragedy. So I thought it was a great ending. It's just we never get back to that story, which sucks because it's so open-ended.
It is a really great story, and I do kind of like, again, that Black Cat is kind of throwing things back in Spider-Man's face, talking about responsibility. It's a shame that we couldn't get a spin-off of them giving chase and hunting vampires and crazy crap like that. It's really unfortunate that we are not going to get any more of Black Cat, because again, she was just such a breath of fresh air. And yeah, we're very much coming to the end of this show, and I know that season 5 is going to get pretty weird, but yeah, it's just unfortunate. Spider-Man literally sitting alone with Terry Lee at the end is so funny. It's sad. The only thing that would have made it better is if they played the 70s Hulk music at the end, because that's how alone Spider-Man is at this point.
God, that's so okay. Like I mentioned, Quantum Leap and Incredible Hulk. Those two of those shows actually were mentioned in this video I found of the top 10 darkest endings to a show. So yeah, that's kind of what the vibe they were going for. And again, it's Terry and Spider-Man alone, not alone, but they're there together. But they know that the loves that they were chasing have just left them. So it's like they were back in the same place where they were, I think, in season 2. So I thought that was kind of cool, very bookending kind of thing. So, and again, the Terry Lee character is kind of underrated because she went from being this side cop character that was kind of getting in the way of Spider-Man to someone that Spider-Man can actually trust now. So that was really cool, and it just sucks that both of them just saw the loves that they wanted just go off. But again, that's the sad ending, like I mentioned, Casablanca. But yeah, it just sucks because even Morbius and Felicia, they're still gonna have that struggle of, well, he's gonna have that injection every day, and that's another big question. Are they gonna have to go back to Whistler? So there's a lot of questions going off in that ending, man. But they never answer them, and it sucks. But It leaves you wanting more for sure. But again, if they ever do that revival that we're praying and hoping for, maybe one of those episodes goes back to Blade and Felicia and ties this all together.
Bumping all the streaming that we're doing of the show puts that thought in their minds. In episode 7, Spider-Man makes a really sloppy decision, and it's a decision that leads to somebody finally figuring out that it is in fact he and Peter Parker are one and the same. Harry Osborn finds out as just sloppy work by Peter, and I guess it's kind of easy to think about because he's got so much on his mind that he makes this one crucial mistake, and now Harry knows who Peter Parker and Spider-Man are, that they are one and the same.
Oh, yeah. It's just, yeah. That scene was just so frustrating, man. Wasn't it? Wasn't it?
A little bit, but I think episode 8 is great. Episode 8 is my favorite. It might be my favorite of the entire series. There's so much good stuff here. Like, I can't really think of a plot line or anything. Like, this is just a really tight 20 minutes of storytelling. It didn't feel too... Like, I feel like sometimes these episodes feel too busy. This did not feel too busy. It felt like it had the right balance. There was a lot of humor with Harry arguing with quote-unquote Green Goblin. You get the spirit of Goblin and he interacting, like Green Goblin teasing the fact that Harry will be able to see his father. And, like, I love the fact that he gets him to pull a lever and release some gas, and then he becomes the Green Goblin. We get the Punisher not wanting to punish people, which is a little bit on the weird side. But it is worth noting there were definitely 2 female writers that were on this episode. And I think it really shows because the Punisher behaves a little bit uncharacteristically, but I very much appreciated that they tried to take his character in another direction. And you did get Anna actually getting dialogue in this episode. And of course, she did complain about Peter Parker. But I think they justified it much better by giving her a specific purpose and saying to the Punisher to please find Mary Jane. Like, I think they couched it so much better. So yeah, the fact that they refocused the Aunt Anna just a little bit, what they were doing with the Punisher and that whole setup, very, very good stuff in this episode. And we're going to continue on, but any thoughts on kind of the setup?
Yeah, it's a little different. It's just, I don't know. It just seems like he's looking for redemption, which is weird because when the last time we saw the Punisher, he was just kind of like out for whatever, kind of like vengeance. So very, very big contrast here. You kind of wonder what happened in between. So there's always a, because I was like, what the heck happened? He seems like a different person. So I did like the fact that he's helping out and he's reaching out. But again, like I was DMing you, it's like fucking Punisher's like an idiot sometimes. Like he just doesn't know who to put. He just blames the wrong people sometimes. You know what I mean? Like Peter Parker must be the Green Goblin. I'm like, oh no. Now this is going to become this other thing, and it's just going to get in the way, and then it's just this this miscommunication, and it's like, oh, great, we're now going to have this fight scene when we need the fight scene between Harry and Peter, not Peter and the Punisher. So that's kind of how I felt. It kind of got in the way, but at the same time, it was a way for to work in the Mary Jane coming back storyline, quote unquote. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and then when Harry starts getting, I guess, messages from his father. Well, after watching Interstellar now, like it makes more sense to me now that that Harry is talking to Norman, or no, Norman is talking to Harry from that other dimension, right? Like that's what's going on. Like it's Interstellar, right?
I mean, it's funny you say Interstellar because I feel like we've had 2 recent Disney projects that have one indirectly mentioning and focusing with Interstellar, Lightyear, and Thor, Love and Thunder directly mentioning Interstellar. So it's funny you say that.
Oh, that's why I mentioned it, because it's been stuck in my head. And ever since that scene of Natalie Portman poking the holes between the 2 pieces of paper, I was like, oh shit, they did this in the first season of Stranger Things. And then once you start thinking about that, it's like, oh yeah, what happened to that teacher in Stranger Things? Did he just disappear? Is he dead? Did I forget that he died? But at the same time, you start thinking like, wow, that's becoming a trope now of how to explain.
Guess what Stranger Things needed? One more character.
Yeah, but now it's become this trope to explain, these wormhole things like, oh, we're just going to take a piece of paper and poke a pencil through it, and that's how we're going to simply explain this to the audience. But in a way, that's kind of what happened, because if the Goblin is stuck in this other dimensional rift wherever, And I guess if he can cross into that other dimension, like in Interstellar, that fourth dimensional plane or whatever, and see time as a circle, he can communicate with Norman, or yeah, with Harry. So to me, that's what I was like, wow, I finally figured out what was going on. Because when I was a kid, I was like, oh, this dude's crazy. He's talking to no one. He's talking to his dad. But then there is a scene at some point where Spider-Man's like, who are you talking to? But then how does he know that, blah, 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 and all these different things? And how did he know where to look for the bombs and all those different things, right? So it has to be clearly communication from Harry from another dimension.
One of the things that I really also loved about this episode is that there is some action, but it definitely doesn't feel as actiony as so many other Spider-Man episodes do. I also love the fact that there's a lot of tension with Harry and with Green Goblin, and Spider-Man and Punisher become involved. In the end, I love the fact that Punisher is holding Green Goblin / Harry captive. I love that Harry completely snaps and looks like he hasn't slept in like 3 days. That's pretty funny to me, that he just completely loses it. And we get Peter coming home. Punisher is on the couch with Green Goblin. I thought that was pretty amusing. Punisher asks where MJ is. He wants to know. He's going to finally interrogate Peter Parker. And what you know what, Brian? The doorbell rings, and Mary Jane is the one who's ringing the doorbell. Mary Jane and Peter say they love each other. Punisher's like, you know what? Screw this. Screw your love. I am taking you back to your aunt, but I'm not even going to let you walk. I'm going to carry you into the house and drop you on the couch. What a kind of a weird moment, but Punisher actually feels good about himself and what he's done, because he's not punishing Brian. He is rewarding.
Yeah, but also at the same time, this dude just stole the credit for saving someone when they just literally walked in the door and literally fell into his arms. He's just like, I don't know. Is this like a white privilege thing or something? I don't know. But like, he's totally stealing credit that he doesn't deserve. So I don't. It was kind of conflicting. I was like, dude, you just fucking took all the credit and like you didn't do anything. Like you were just in the way this whole episode. I don't know. That's kind of how I felt about the Punisher in this one. It was just kind of in the way, but at the same time, they used him properly to help bring back this Mary Jane version, quote unquote. But at the same time, you mentioned Harry just having no sleep. I love that little detail. I love the details of him going back to the exact locations from the end of season 3, because that's such a villain thing to do. Like to go back of this, where it all started, you and I. Because like I mentioned before, like I went on a Stallone-a-thon. One of the movies was Assassins. At the end of the movie, Antonio Banderas, the bad guy, is so obsessed with Stallone that he has to go back to this one location where Stallone killed the guy years before, and is so determined to kill Stallone from that one location that he's sitting there all day waiting for Stallone to come out of the building and shoot him from that location. So I get it. Like there's this weird thing about villains, and like they just are obsessed with like going back to the past and like killing people in a specific way. And then I get it. So that's why Harry did all this shit, just to kind of like fuck with Spider-Man. Like, we're going back to where you lost Mary Jane and where my dad was gone and all that shit. So I thought that was pretty on point for a villain.
All right, Harry says everything will be better now that Mary Jane is back, and then we go to the next episode. Brian, we start at a pirate costume party. My favorite detail is that Jameson is wearing a fake mustache that is only slightly bigger than his real mustache.
Oh boy, this scene. I think I DM'd you before. Like, was like, oh, nothing like rich white people showing off old money they stole from the past, right? Right?
I love the fact that this guy has donated a lot of quote unquote treasure, and a bunch of robot pirates immediately try to steal it. I love that Spider-Man appears very quickly, and Jameson doesn't want to hide. I guess we get to see not quite Jigsaw Jameson, but Jameson's like, you know what? I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay here, and I guess either report on what's going on or catch Spider-Man actually doing something bad or whatever. So it was nice to see Jameson a part of the action, and we have not gotten a lot of Spider-Man Jameson banter. We haven't really gotten a lot of Jameson this season, but it was nice to get some banter between those two.
But of course he's going to like insult Spider-Man in front of his face, and the next second ask for his help. Like, that's the total Jameson MO. And I'm glad they kind of brought that little bit back, because that's totally what Jameson does with Spider-Man, and they did it here. And I thought it was funny because, like, robot pirates, like, we're going Scooby-Doo with this until they finally reveal, of course, it's Mysterio. So then once you start thinking about what the fuck is going on, and then spoiler alert, there's two Mysterios. What? So it was just kind of weird, and
I am
like, I don't know.
pissed that the two Mysterios did not point at each other, because if they did, then we could create our own new meme.
Yeah, an alternate history with a different meme of Spider-Man. So
I was very
weird.
disappointed in that aspect. I will say that it was nice to see Mysterio not be the actual villain and to kind of be straddling. He definitely not a good character, but not total evil as well, as there is kind of a romantic interest. I will say there were two listed female writers for this episode specifically. I feel like we got more from Mary Jane in this episode than we have the rest of the series combined. Like, she basically has her own storyline. Unfortunately, she is put in danger multiple times and Spider-Man has to save her, which kind of stinks, but it feels like they do give her a little bit of agency in terms of she is trying to be an actor. She is taking the place of Miranda Wilson, who was killed thanks to Quentin Beck, who becomes Mysterio. But the reality is Miranda Wilson is not dead. She wants to take over Mary Jane's body because she wants to be beautiful again, which it's 1994. This is a very shallow storyline. I can't say that I was a fan necessarily, but I appreciate the fact that Mary Jane actually gets her own storyline.
Yeah, that was cool because it had the flashbacks and kind of refreshed your memory on, like, her past history. And then it kind of sucks because it makes it seem like it seems like her dad just walked out on her just because, like, oh my God, you kids are messy. I'm leaving. I'm done. And I was just laughing my ass off, like, wow. Out of all the things for an absentee father, for all the reasons to leave their kid, it was because their kid was messy. And I was like, wow, okay, oversimplification of parents leaving their kids. So I thought that was kind of like, wow, they kind of just brushed over that instead of giving it like a real serious thing. But there's probably some underlying stuff there that they probably didn't want to touch on, obviously. So I thought it was really interesting that the whole concept of this was like, they think that this Miranda actress is dead, but there was no body. So I was like, if there's no body, why are they accusing of a murder? And then, of course, it's like, it's cartoon logic. And then once they show the flashback of her body being found by Quentin Beck, it's like her body seems fine. Like, why did you turn her into a robot? And once you see the robot, the only like human thing left is a part of her face. And I was like, oh, this is some strange body horror type shit going on. So I appreciated that. So I thought it was pretty interesting the direction they went.
Does this mean David Cronenberg is going to direct a Spider-Man movie featuring Miranda Wilson?
I was thinking the exact same thing, to be honest, because this seems like that type of movie, like a Cronenberg movie where a guy finds a woman, thinks she's not the perfect woman anymore, and replaces her with robot parts. Like, that's such a Cronenberg type movie, man. So again, they acknowledge the B-movie horror, and that's definitely like B-movie horror, and this is all about B-movie effects. Also wanted to point out that I think that they were kind of making like fun of the fact that they replaced Bruce Lee in Game of Death. Because did you notice, like, oh, we almost finished this movie with Miranda, but it was just two scenes that we couldn't conveniently just write out of the movie and just release the movie. But we need to finish this movie with these two scenes. So I was like, oh, they very much with the Bruce Lee thing. When Bruce Lee died, it couldn't finish.
I mean, given what we know about these writers in terms of horror, it would not surprise me if you could just expand the palette a little bit and make that connection as well. So that, I mean, a line about B movies is literally used. So I think that is absolutely a possibility. I also want to point out a couple things. You would think Mysterio, being a great illusionist and being this great technological person, maybe make some waterproof robots. How about that?
You would think so. But there's a lot of just like technological plot holes in this kind of episode that I just kind of had to brush over, man.
Say that, but I do want to compliment the fact that Robot Rhino is as useless as the real Rhino.
True that. But like, I don't know, like, how did Mysterio know all the details about Carnage and Venom? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what the fuck? So I get that's my kind of.
It's like Spaceballs, Brian. He was watching the movie as it was going on.
And apparently he took money from Kingpin like way earlier in the series that we didn't even know about. and built all these robots in the
lot of flashbacks in this specific episode, which has its good points and bad points.
Also, Mary Jane going into this like water whirlpool, like with no lifeguard, no safety restraint, no no safety team at all. Just a totally unprofessional shoot. I couldn't help but think of Bowfinger.
I mean, how do you think Miranda Wilson ended up quote unquote dead? For this very reason.
Exactly, but I thought of Bowfinger, man. Just like, we need to finish this movie. We can get a stand-in for these couple scenes, and then we'll have the person just run across the freeway like it's no problem.
Pretty funny stuff. So, kind of a tragic ending. I guess Mysterio and Miranda are dead, right?
I think so, but again, like they kind of went with the Superman 3 thing where they turned like that woman into the machine thing. So I was just kind of like, whoa, dark. I mean, it doesn't seem dark probably for the writers, but it's dark for a person like me who finds body horror type stuff kind of like, ugh, that's kind of like, you know what I mean? So for me, I think they are dead, but I don't know, because I don't even know if Mysterio's done and he's coming back in season 5 or whatever, but because we hadn't seen Mysterio in so long too. So I don't know. It was very weird. And then I did like the twist of like he's still in jail, but then who's the Mysterio that I just fought? So for like that brief couple minutes, it was like a really good mystery. And then he kind of got ruined with like the underground cave thing. But every villain needs like an underground layer. So more tropes on top of tropes, I guess.
For sure. And we get Spider-Man and Mary Jane on the roof to end the episode. He unmasks. So at the beginning of the next one, we are going to find out how Mary Jane will react to the fact that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are indeed one in the same. So Spider-Man's just tired of hiding his identity, and he's ready to take the next step, I guess. And we'll be discussing that next week. Any final thoughts, Brian? I thought this was a really strong set of episodes, much better than last week, as good, if not better, than what we discussed 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, this was definitely a high point. Like, you're really high on the Goblin episode, and that's definitely like a top 5 for me. But I'm even higher on the Morbius return episode, probably because of like the Felicia stuff and the tragedy with his mom and that sad ending. So that's kind of where I'm at too. But like those 2 episodes back to back were really, really great. I just I kind of think that they should have saved more of more Harry episodes, as the Goblin, but they just kind of stuck to one, and I guess that's all they needed. But the Mysterio episode was, for Hollywood buffs like us, it was kind of like, oh, we noticed these little things like no lifeguard, no safety harness, a whirlpool that just sucks into the bottom of the studio into nowhere. Those little things like that. So it's kind of fun just seeing all the Hollywood isms, I guess you'd say. You know what I mean? So I would say this was the last episode was solid, but definitely recommend Return of the Green Goblin and the Vampire Queen, because especially Vampire Queen for me, because that felt like an open-ended movie that I'm just waiting to watch that I'm never going to get. So.
All right. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. We will talk to you again next week to finish up our discussion of Spider-Man Season 4.
So are they even going to answer the question as to how the Daily Bugle got to Europe on the roof ledge of a castle?